All right, thank you everyone who was able to attend here in person, and then for those of you at home. If there's any questions, feel free to interrupt. This is really just an informative session of everything you need to know to bring a medical device to market in less than an hour, because that's all it takes, I guess. So we'll get started. I do have some a slide presentation just to kind of drive the discussion, but again, feel free to interrupt, or if there's any questions, let me know. So a little bit about the company. So as Scott mentioned, JLEX Medical, I co-founded the company almost 10 years ago. We are a team of engineers, myself included, and we focus on everything product development, regulatory affairs, and quality management systems. These are anything in the Class 1 and Class 2 device arena of trying to get your product from an idea or concept to market. Here I have just a general overall life cycle, product development life cycle. This isn't all-encompassing, but it's a general understanding of how, the different stages that a device has to go through to take it from an idea all the way to commercialization. So at first we start with a regulatory strategy. It's really important to understand, what are the requirements that either FDA or international notified bodies are looking for to review the device, the idea, the concept, and ensure that it's safe and effective for use. So it's really identifying the roadmap of everything that your device will need to undergo in order to be cleared for market. Next would be concept and prototyping. So once you have that idea, you know roughly what it's going to take to get it to commercialization. You want to start, conceptualizing, identifying the problem, putting together different prototypes, feasibility, really trying to just come to an understanding of how this device can be made, can be introduced, and what need it's going to help support the user, the end user, the surgeon, physician, or the patient. Then you get into the meat of the actual product development and manufacturing. So not only you've got your concept, you know that it's going to work, and now you're going to take the necessary steps to figure out how to make it and how to make it, safely, how to ensure that you have quality and good manufacturing practices, and how you're going to go through the testing requirements, verification and validation to ensure that your product is safe for use. And then the final portion is the regulatory clearance and post-market surveillance. So should your device require any pre-market notification with FDA or CE mark or other outside US certifications, you'll get that certification in place, and then all of the activities from a quality management system that go into post-market surveillance and tracking your product throughout its total life cycle and ensure that you consistently are able to provide it safely to the end user. So oddly enough, the first question that people may just completely skip over is, do you even have a medical device? So there are instances where you may think that it serves a medical purpose, but it actually doesn't fall under the regulation requirements. So I'm not going to read this, and I'm not going to read this out loud. You guys can certainly take a look, but it comes from the FDA website, and it's just the general description and definition of what an actual medical device is based on the regulation requirements and diagnosis of disease, other conditions, cure, mitigation, treatment, things along those lines. There's also areas in wellness and other medical purposes that there's, understanding if it's a medical device, and that really dictates what you're going to need to understand moving forward. So FDA.gov has this definition for your reference. The next major step is, what is the classification? So I mentioned early on, we focus specifically in Class 1 and Class 2, and the classification is determined by the risk to the patient. I know earlier today there was already discussion heavily in the regulatory space. So I'll just give a brief overview here, because then I'll really get into the design and the development portion of medical device development. But Class 1 devices, they're the low risk. They have minimal subject to regulatory requirements. I have images of different devices here. So a lot of people are surprised to know that floss is a medical device. It is. But these classification devices are very low risk to patients. You generally don't have to go through pre-market notification to take these to market. Class 2 is where the regulatory requirements start to get a little bit more in depth. So you do have to go to FDA or other notified bodies to get your device reviewed, and there's a lot more testing, verification, validation, and manufacturing requirements that have to go into play so that this device can be brought to market safely. The example that I have here is a total knee replacement. So oddly enough, many implants do not fall in a higher classification. They fall right in the class 2. It's really dependent on market claims and what your device is intended to, to support the patient and the end user. And then the third classification is class 3. So these are, the highest risk. They are life-supporting, life-sustaining devices. They are They go through a very rigorous pre-market approval process. Typically, there's clinical trials, a lot of clinical evaluation, verification, validation, testing, working on going through the device investigative device exemption so that these can be evaluated on patients prior to clearance. These are definitely the more rigorous classification devices that have a substantial amount of time and evaluation to be able to be cleared for use on patients. So I mentioned the classifications, and now there's the few steps that it takes for the pre-market notification. So these are the submission requirements that a device company needs to move forward with in order for FDA or other entities to review their product. So 510K clearance is for Class 2 devices. This is also synonymous with pre-market notification. It's when you have the opportunity to present your device up against a substantially equivalent device that's already on the market. You compare the technological characteristics, the performance, and all things that have to do with the device performance to ensure that yours is equally as equivalent and safe for use on patients. This is primarily almost all Class 2 devices, and the review process with FDA is 90 days. The next is Denovo. So this is where actually it's a somewhat different application process. So it's a Class 1 or Class 2 device, but there isn't a predicate that you're able to demonstrate equivalence to. So this is where the device itself is low risk, but it's novel, and so therefore you need to go to FDA in advance and present to them, why your device is not high risk, why it should fall under this Denovo novel device, and you have to present all of the information. It's more of a risk-benefit based decision for FDA to determine if this device is what classification it would end up falling in, Class 1 or 2, and then actually having an intended use or a product code created specifically for your device. That review period is roughly 120 days, although based on historic data over the last couple of years, FDA is running roughly around the 200 to 250 day review period. And then the third pre-market submission is the pre-market approval process. So that's the PMA. This is for those Class 3 devices, new and high-risk devices, a substantial amount of information that goes into this submission process, and their review time is 180 days. And it's not to say that leading up to the submission is very short. I mean, just FDA's review period at 90, 120, or 180 is them reviewing the information. But there's almost always interactive review and questions that go back and forth with FDA, especially when you get into the Denovo and the PMA side, where they really just want to get a better understanding of your technology. So now we'll go into the development side. So this is where all the design engineering and the product development really supports the product development. So here I'll run through just an example. This is a spine device that we actually created for presentation purposes, but really just the different steps that you need to consider when you're taking your idea from a napkin sketch, as you see here, and bringing it through the product development life cycle. You'll create your 3D models to capture the concept, so using computer-aided design, some sort of CAD package, SolidWorks, to actually create and be able to manipulate and create different configurations of your device. You'll also want to determine, what are the material specification requirements, any structural requirements, depending on what the device is, whether it's an implant, whether it's, a robust instrumentation. There's certain structural requirements, loading, impact forces, all of the engineering elements that go into what is this device going to see, in its use case, and how can I create, the appropriate risk mitigations to ensure that I have the appropriate materials and that we've analyzed this from an engineering perspective. And then it's fabricating fit and function prototypes. So it's nice that we have 3D printing as an option. A lot of times, if that's not able to be the end material, it is a quick way to get pretty good fit and feasibility functional prototypes in our hands before we go too far down the line of developing the product. The next important part is now that you have your functional prototype and you're confident that you've developed something that is going to be able to withstand, like I said, the end use case and what this device is going to undergo, you need to identify the appropriate manufacturing process and then also create the final models and drawings for programming and inspection. So at JLEX, we work on a variety of devices that fall in plastic injection molding, fabricated from traditional manufacturing and machining, and 3D printed implants and instrumentation. So there's reasons for each process, what's going to be successful, depending on a variety of factors, not only the structural integrity, but even like inventory and the end goal of how this device is going to be housed for long-term use, even within a warehouse per se. The next biggest point is the verification and validation. So again, as you're stepping through the development life cycle, there's the engineering analysis and the finalization of the specifications that this product is going to it's actually going to function for long-term use in whatever capacity it needs to. So I've listed here, you have bench and mechanical testing. So this device here, this is an Instron machine going through mechanical testing. So, in the spine, for instance, it has to have so many, 5 million cycles for so many loads to withstand, the loading of the spine of a person. There's bench and mechanical testing. There's either ASTM standards that, these protocols are well thought out and FDA is very familiar with, or you need to evaluate, your device. What are the different steps that your device is going to see once it's being used, with a patient, and you have to identify what appropriate protocols and testing needs to go into the device so that you can present that information to FDA. The second major point would be clinical evaluation. So a lot of Class 2 devices and implants included, oddly enough, do not necessarily need to go through clinical trials. But there are many instances where if you have a certain market or clinical claim that you want to prove that is somewhat outside of what is normal for like a particular product code or a regulation device, you would go through the clinical evaluation portion, utilizing clinical trials, whether that be with an IRB, clinical research organization to identify appropriate protocols and sample size and subjects and all of the data and the testing requirements that go into that. Biocompatibility is clearly one of the bigger requirements for anything that's going to touch the patient. So I know personally, just with many of our submissions in the last couple of years, FDA has really been very stringent on making sure that biocompatibility testing is from a conservative standpoint, that you actually do go through all of the tests that are required based on their 10993 guidance. But if not, that you have the appropriate justification, the manufacturing processes, the cleaning processes, everything well established, and working with appropriate manufacturers so that you can prove and justify why biocompatibility testing is not required for your device. It's a little bit of it's an interesting, I guess, dichotomy of there's devices that are on the market that are identically manufactured or fabricated in the same way, but FDA really wants to know that you've done your due diligence to confirm that you're following those steps and processes to ensure biocompatibility of your device. The next one is sterilization and reprocessing. So, whether your device is provided single-use sterile, whether your device is, an instrument that goes through repeated cleaning and sterilization, it's really important that you go through the validation process of ensuring that, your worst-case scenario device is able to be sterilized appropriately based on parameters that are required for, there's a host of standards for both cleaning as well as the sterilization and packaging and distribution and shelf life. So, just placing your device in a bag and shipping it to a hospital, there's an entire protocol of requirements and 6 to 8 weeks of testing that you must undergo to ensure that, there's no puncturing of the device during transport, that you're not compromising any sterility throughout that process, and ensuring that the device, as it leaves for the end user, that it arrives in the same manner. A major portion of verification and validation is design controls. So this is where documentation. Some people love it, some people hate it. I like it, my engineers love it, but when it comes to like FMEAs and traceability matrix and kind of connecting all of the dots and the risk management, it's not just here's my device, here's my physical component, here's the manufacturing drawings to make it. There's also an entire set of documents that you have to go through this iterative process to ensure that you've really, dotted your I's and crossed all of your T's to ensure that, you've thought of all of the risks that could be associated with the device once it goes out into the market, that, you're mitigating anything from a design perspective to ensure that, there's no patient harm inadvertently. And all of this is done through this design history file or design controls documentation. It includes your inputs, outputs, V&V, and then your design transfer so that, you have this nice package of information that you're able to transfer to manufacturing for full-scale production and commercialization moving forward. And then the regulatory clearance portion. So now that you've got everything designed, developed, your submission package has been reviewed, FDA gives you the regulatory clearance. You need to register and list your device. So through FDA's database, you go in there, you register and list your entity based on the establishment that you are. There's a variety of establishments that you need to register and list for depending on how you supply the products. So, if you're a specification developer, you own the product, you're liable for everything that happens once the product's in the field, but maybe you don't physically make it, in your own manufacturing setting. There's also, contract manufacturers and contract sterilizers who provide finished goods. They have to be registered and listed for your product. There's a variety of, like I said, establishments that you need to identify, ensure that your suppliers are registered and listed for the appropriate steps that they provide, and then you as well as the owner of the product. And then one of the other post-market surveillance requirements is the quality management system. Although this is somewhat usually thought of as an afterthought when the product has been developed, you really should have some sort of framework for your quality management system throughout the process. So there aren't any specific requirements for a QMS in the pre-market stages. However, it's very important to have aspects of your quality system at least initiated and started, and that does revolve around like the designing, purchasing, manufacturing, labeling, packaging, storing, anything that this device is going to immediately foresee once it starts to go into the commercialized arena. And the two of the main standards for quality management system requirements are 21 CFR 820 as well as ISO 13485. These probably sound very familiar to those in this industry, but the first one being it's FDA's regulations. So they're all of the regulations for good manufacturing practices for quality system requirements. It's the framework of what FDA would wants to see when they come and do, an audit or an investigation of your facility. It's all of the processes, the work instructions, the forms, pretty much everything that your company has to move forward with and have in place so that you can prove that you have the proper and appropriate controls from a quality perspective to be able to consistently create a product and get it to market for safe and effective use each and every time. And ISO 13485 is, it's the ISO standard, somewhat of the same. They are mostly aligned. There are a few nuances, and I know that FDA and ISO are trying to officially harmonize eventually, but we know that could probably, I think they've been talking about it for years, and I think it's still years in the making. But this is really also, it's the framework of everything that you need to know from an SOP, standard operating procedures that you can demonstrate to FDA or to, an external auditor that, hey, this is the appropriate steps that we take to be able to manufacture our products safely every time. And then FDA does perform inspections to ensure this, compliance. We participate in a lot of audits from our FDA where we go in and we answer questions and we help support our clients from the perspective of, these are the different procedures. FDA does come and they check against records. Are you keeping a device history record? Can you trace all of the elements of your product once it leaves, your facility? Do you know where it goes, and what kind of labeling and traceability do you have, and what kind of controls are in place from a company perspective? And that's what FDA does. During COVID, I know they took a little bit of a time out, but they're coming back around, and we've already been part of several just in the last month or two. So the big question is that I get all the time: how much is this going to cost me? A lot. It's a medical device, so I don't know if you're familiar, but anything that you use on a patient, it's going to cost some money. So, and rightfully so, because if you think about it, if you had to have a procedure, or your family members, or anybody close to you, you would want to ensure that everything has been reviewed and put in place, that you feel confident that the knee replacement that your grandma has to go through, or like a shoulder surgery process that like maybe your son hurts himself in soccer, just for example, that the companies are actually going through the appropriate stages, and they cost money. So these are rough estimates. They're by no means all-encompassing, but it just kind of gives you an idea, because, if you look at going into developing a medical device and you think, oh, I just need like $10,000 or $15,000. I mean, the extensive amount of testing and manufacturing and things that are not even really part of the design portion itself is pretty substantial, especially when you get into devices that have electronics and software. Software as a medical device. I mean, I didn't even touch on any of those aspects where, software design history file alone is binders of information and code and requirements that FDA wants to ensure that you have, you've gone through that well thought out process to develop something safely each time. So what I've kind of listed here is, a Class 1 device, it doesn't have to go through Premarket. Usually there are some exemptions. You're looking at $250,000 to $1 million, and it's really dependent on, the complexity, what this device entails, what kind of testing goes into this type of device. Class 2, you're looking at, 12 to 24 months, generally speaking, and this could be $500,000 to well over $1 million. And again, it's, the variety of devices in the Class 2 space, it could be a rather complex instrumentation, or it could be a navigation system for vascular surgery. I mean, so the the difference between the two is pretty substantial, but they do fall in the same classification. So you're looking at least, $500,000 to $1 million plus at that stage. And then class 3, this is when, these are life-sustaining, life-supporting, very high-risk devices, a lot of verification, validation, clinical evaluation. All of that has to go into, the product development life cycle, and that's where you're looking at, 5 to 10, even more years, $20 to $100 million. I mean, it's class 3 devices are a pretty substantial, consideration for the medical device industry. And again, I have to caution, just a general slide. All the time and cost is really dependent on the complexity, the operating costs, the resources for manufacturing, what specific information comes from the end user, and all of the, design control and documentation and testing that this device has to undergo, So everybody likes case studies, and myself included, because I get to see these all the time. It's nice to know, it is. There are do's and don'ts, right way and wrong way to do things. And I can tell you that, from being in this industry for over 18 years, personally, it's really best to do the right thing and follow the rules and regulations. There's no shortcutting, and when you do shortcut, you only hurt yourself, your reputation. You're, potentially a patient. So it's really important to make sure that you follow the appropriate steps throughout this process. There's no, don't try to skip ahead because it really is just really important. There's rules and regulations so that it keeps patients from getting hurt. So I have a couple case studies that I'll just run through of people that did the right thing and people that did the wrong thing. So the first was a manufacturer. They were marketing their device for off-label use. I'm sure people have heard that. I know in our world we don't want to hear off-label usage, so we, immediately say that's not a thing. There's labeling requirements for a reason, so you should follow those because we wouldn't want anybody to be, inadvertently harmed because they're not using the device as it's intended. The client came to us. They did not have a quality system compliant with 21 CFR 820. So what happened? FDA came in and saw that they didn't have the appropriate processes and systems in place. They were using the device as it was not intended to be used, and you can imagine that the investigator did not look very lightly on this situation. So what happened? They immediately got a warning letter. For those of you that aren't familiar, if you get a warning letter, that's public record now. You've been scolded by FDA for doing the wrong thing, and it's public record forever because once it's on the internet, it's always on the internet. But they came in, they gave them a warning letter for not having any design controls, no CAPA system, purchasing controls, complaint investigations, acceptance activities, no device master record, no device history record, and they had no management responsibilities. Executive management, he thought that, well, I'm selling one device to one small hospital. I'm okay. I don't need all of this. I'm good. And I told him that was not the case. And after FDA walked in, he told me, Jen, you're allowed to say I told you so 3 times, and then you have to stop because I know I did the wrong thing and I should have listened to you. And I was like, yes. So yes, they were selling an adulterated device without pre-market clearance. So I think I have a slide that says what happened. Oh, that's case study 2. So I'll go back. So the mess that we had to unfold and go through, had he done it, the right way, cost him substantially more in the long run. So he had multiple recalls for his company and his device. He had to reach out to, his few surgeons that were using the device, have all this written buy-off that, there were no problems. He had to go to the regional site of FDA where they made him wait 5 hours for a 15-minute meeting and then told him he could turn around and go home. They really just kind of put him through the ringer, and rightfully so, because he didn't take it seriously of how important it is to have a quality system. Although the device was designed and being manufactured safely, he didn't have the right processes in place to show that to FDA, And that's really where they were saying, this is serious. You're creating and selling a medical device to patients, and you need to actually, follow the rules and regulations. That's why we have them in place. So it took him it took him about 1.5 years, 2 years to get out of his mess. And he should have listened to me. So I did tell him so 3 times. Case study, let's see, the next one I have here. So this is a good one. So this company, they had a temperature monitoring device for infants. And they had a very robust 21 CFR compliant QMS. They had appropriate procedures and maintained their records in accordance with 21 CFR 820. And they were inspected by FDA with 0 483 findings. So it's not necessarily uncommon to get 483 observations from FDA. You just don't want to go to the next level of warning letters. 43 observations do happen. Clearly, the less, the better. But this just shows you, they had all of the appropriate testing and the appropriate records and design history file and device master record and traceability and all of the processes where FDA came and asked them questions, and they were easily able to provide the information and to suffice FDA's needs with 0 findings. And here's the third case study. So this is not the actual spine implant, but we helped support a spine company where they implemented design controls throughout the development process. So we did full product development for this company. So we implemented appropriate design controls, went through the entire input, output, risk, verification, validation, design transfer process. We applied for, the device-specific. It had FDA guidance for all of the safety and effectiveness and quality requirements for the device-specific. It was for an interbody cage. And we achieved market clearance in 54 days for a spine implant. And that's it. So that's all you need to know to bring a device to market. I hope that it seems that easy, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to help, because it's definitely not that easy. And I must say, regardless of who you're working with internally, externally, it's really important to partner and find the appropriate people that can help support each of these functions here. Along the path to development, there's expertise along the way. So ensure that you're partnering with somebody that can really help push you and educate you, especially in the startup field. I know that a lot of people in attendance today are startups, and the more that you can gain that education and support from partners or internal resources, the better off you'll be. So that's it. Thank you very much for your time. Are there any questions?